that 생각하죠. 유지기 최 간리시네 유나게 현실에 되는 주마마로 간레마 되버주버지가 말이에요.
Good evening. So last week we looked at how all compounded phenomena, so phenomena that aren't necessarily a gathering of coming together of causes and conditions, therefore arise and hence are called compounded. They arise independent of causes and conditions. They are not independent of causes and conditions. They are not existent from their own side. But there are those then that here, if something isn't existent from its own side, then it is non-existent. So therefore, can be no such thing as anger, because if anger is not existent from its own side, it doesn't exist. So there's also no antidote to anger, namely patience, because if it doesn't exist from its own side, it is non-existent. And therefore, if there's no affliction, and there's no antidote to this non-existent affliction, there can also be no liberation from non-existent affliction. So there's no liberation, there's no omniscient consciousness. And those who hold such a view are the Buddhist philosophical schools from the Svatrantika Madhyamaka down, so including Chittamatra, Sautrantika, and Vaibhashika. So the majority of Buddhist schools hold this view, that for something to exist, it has to exist from its own side. There must be some essence establishing it from its own side. Prasangika, though, they say, you're completely mistaken. Prasangika Madhyamika are alone in rejecting that view. They say, if something were to exist from its own side, being established by way of its own essence or characteristics or nature, being self-existent, it could never change. That essence that establishes it could never change. And that means that, say, anger, if it existed from its own side, it could never ever change. Moreover, nothing could impact it, because it exists by way of its own essence, not dependently, but independent. And therefore, being independent of causes, no causes can impact on it. So, no antidote could impact on anger. Anger would never change. And an antidote, such as patience, if it were to exist from its own side, it could, not being established from causes, it couldn't interact with anything anyway. So what you're saying makes no sense. Rather, the Prasangika say that phenomena do not exist from their own side, established or self-existent, established by way of their own essence. They are empty of existing in this way. Rather, they exist dependently. Therefore, that through cultivating antidotes and applying them to afflictions, they can be reduced and eventually eradicated. And there is nothing illogical in asserting that. There is this, through the cultivation of causes, what has come together independence on causes, through cultivating compounded phenomena, through cultivating contrary causes, those compounded phenomena can change, can be developed or eradicated, and therefore liberation is possible. So we've been looking at this presentation for a number of verses now on cultivating the patience that is intent on Dharma, which is showing that there is no free will. And we've spoken about that, which means independence. And rather phenomena are empty of being independent. Now we come to summary verses summarizing this subsection of the chapter. So the first of the two summary verses, verse 33. Thus, whether a close friend or even an enemy are seen doing wrong, remain at peace by bearing in mind that this is just due to some sort of cause. The first word, thus. So thus is a linking term showing that following can be expressed as independence on the reasons just presented. So thus performs that kind of function. And so the reasons that have been presented are, in summary, that afflictions, that which causes us harm, our actual enemies, are not self-existent. They arise independent on causes. So they come about independent on causes. They are not independent of causes, which means they are not self-existent. So that's the primary reason that we've been looking at thus far, or in this section of verses. And the line continues, whether a close friend or even an enemy. A close friend, so this now refers to people. So a person that we have a close, warm connection with, someone who tends to act in accordance with our wishes, a friend, or even an enemy. So someone who acts contrary to our wishes, someone we do not get on with. Then to the second line, thus whether a close friend or even an enemy are seen doing wrong. So seen doing wrong, or could be more literal as acting in inappropriate ways, or seen acting in inappropriate ways. So this is in relation to whomever is acting in a way that brings harm. Whether it is someone that in general you don't feel close to, that in fact you have an averse relationship with, so an enemy, and that enemy may be acting in a way that is negative or harmful towards yourself, or towards those within your group, or just in general. If they are doing, if such a person, or someone who is a close friend, someone that you have a good relationship with, if they are acting in an unskillful manner, acting under the influence of the afflictions, then in either case, our usual response is to be upset, or perhaps, especially if it's a close friend, we'd be disappointed. This isn't how we usually experience it. Whatever whomever this person is, acting in a particular way, do not criticize them. Do not criticize them. Understand that they are merely acting under the influence of the afflictions. The first two lines, no matter who is acting in a way that causes harm, do not criticize. Rather, and now the third and fourth line, presenting how one should train oneself to respond, remain at peace by bearing in mind that this is just due to some sort of cause. So no matter who is behaving who's doing wrong or acting inappropriately, do not get heated up and opinionated, but rather keep calm, maintain your gentle heart. To do so, reflect in the fourth line that they are acting in this way for reasons which may be obvious or may not be so obvious. Whatever it may be, we can know it's due to causes and conditions. So again, whether those causes and conditions are apparent or not, they are acting not with free will, but under the influence of causes. And these causes may be that of confused ignorance, a person thinking that how they're acting will bring benefits to themselves perhaps, but in fact it's not. Or acting under the influence of anger, or attachment, or any other affliction. So this may well be apparent, but even if it's not, know that this is just due to some sort of cause. And therefore, do not get upset. Do not be disappointed. Do not criticize. Rather, by keeping your mind patient, through understanding that this person is merely displaying the afflictions, or displaying or expressing the afflictions that have arisen within, the mind will stay calm and patient, will be at peace, and therefore I can respond with compassion, holding this person close who's actually under the influence of the afflictions. To summarize the meaning of this 33rd verse, which is a summary verse, is that when others, whomever they are, they do wrong, they act in a manner that it brings harm, recognize that they are not doing so with freedom. They are rather under the control of their afflictions. They are be very mindful, very aware that their mind is overwhelmed by their afflictions. They are not thinking clearly. Their mind is tainted, dominated by the afflictions, and therefore they are acting under the power of ignorance, of attachment or anger. So for example, this person almost certainly will be acting in this way, thinking that it will bring them happiness, although because their mind is dominated by confused ignorance, they are destroying the causes of happiness. Or they may be acting under the influence of predominantly of attachment, wanting things to go their own way, desperately grasping at having things go their own way, and they just thereby create causes for further suffering. Or under the influence of anger, desperately trying to protect a self they believe to exist in a particular way, pushing others away, trying to protect this illusory self. So having trained well in this way of thinking, one can recognize it when others express their afflictions through their facial expressions, their physical movement, or the expression of sound or speech. And thereby one knows that this physical behavior or their speech is merely an expression of their suffering mind. Their mind is unhappy. It is overwhelmed by their afflictions. They may not even be aware they are suffering, but a mind dominated by, for example, confused ignorance is creating the causes for suffering. And they are now merely expressing this confusion, this ignorance, this unhappiness. Having trained well like that, immediately one's mind will remain patient. There's no need for one's own mental peace to be disturbed by this disturbed person. One can leave their troubled mind with them, but open one's heart to them. Compassion can freely arise for them. The way we tend to naturally or habitually respond when others do wrong or act in inappropriate ways or speak in a way that is not suitable in a particular situation, whether this is someone that we care for and we are close to, or whether it's someone we despise, is we tend to immediately judge them, criticize them, look down on them. If we see this in ourselves, take it as inspiration. Inspiration to train your mind in the ways presented here. Because this habitual response is the response from a mind that is still afflicted itself. It is not the response of a practitioner who has trained their mind well. Bodhisattva, practitioner who has trained their mind well, responds in the same situation in a remarkably different way. This way of responding is not beyond us. By training in this way, we too can come to respond like that. By recognizing that when people speak or act in a way that is harmful, know that all that has happened is that this person's mind is overwhelmed by their afflictions. They haven't chosen to get angry. They haven't chosen to act in an unskillful manner. Rather, merely through habituation, meeting ripening conditions, these afflictions have arisen, overwhelmed them, deceived them, and are now being expressed. Bodhisattva, they know that as they move through society, they are surrounded by suffering beings, afflicted, suffering beings. So to have them act in ways which are contrary to their own best wishes is to be expected. It's nothing surprising. Therefore, when they see beings following their attachment, acting under anger, acting with confused ignorance, their response is that their heart opens to them, recognizing that these people around them are yearning for happiness, for freedom from pain, but yet are overwhelmed by their afflictions and creating further causes for suffering. Recognizing this, the Bodhisattva's heart naturally opens for them, and they can then engage with people with a loving, tender heart, holding them close, and not looking down on them, not criticizing them, not talking to others about them, because they recognize this process, and they'll hold people close. It's like if we meet someone who's drunk too much alcohol, now their mind is overwhelmed by the effects of the alcohol, and they are saying and doing silly things. Maybe they're angry, maybe they're just talking nonsense. We know that they are now overwhelmed by alcohol. We do not take this personally. This is clearly going on in their mind. We do not take it on. We do not take on the effects of their alcohol. We recognize that the suffering that they are experiencing and is now being expressed is due to causes and conditions. So we try and deal with the situation as best we can. If we can relate to everyone around us in that way, recognizing that as ordinary beings, when they act under the control of the afflictions, nothing surprising. No need to criticize, no need to talk behind their back, no need to complain about them. Rather, open your heart, hold them closely, knowing they're yearning for happiness. Do not take on their afflictions, do not take that suffering as your own, but hold them close and respond with patience and care. In your response to seeing afflicted beings acting under the control of the afflictions, it can be skillful to point a finger, but never point the finger of blame at the person, solely at the afflictions. A person is merely overwhelmed by their afflictions. This isn't their choice. It's not how they want to live their lives. Rather, habituated to afflicted responses, afflictions have once again arisen and overwhelmed. And in fact, the person being harmed most is the suffering being before you. The way then to respond is to use each of these instances to motivate you in two ways. One, in terms of the person who is afflicted, respond in a way to ease their suffering. Respond in a way to ease the strength of these afflictions dominant within them. This can involve staying silent, it can mean apologizing, it may be helping them, whatever it may be. Firstly, respond in a way to ease their suffering. Secondly, and that first way is also the direct way to help others who are suffering. The second way is the indirect method. And you use this instance as motivation to continue to strive to abandon your own afflictions. So when in the presence of a suffering being, if one is trained well, one's mind will be patient, compassion will arise, one will reach out with an open heart to this person and respond directly as best as one can to ease their suffering. And the second manner is the indirect response, which is recognizing there's really not much I can do here. There's so little I can do for this person. I have to strive to abandon my own afflictions so that I can actually know what to do in these challenging situations and make right decisions, not just hope for the best. I have to become a Buddha. Because as I progress, and eventually when I do become a Buddha, I will know what to do and be able to help others skillfully. So this is the second way to respond, to continue to strive to abandon your afflictions. So when you encounter suffering beings, when they express their afflictions to you, directly help them by responding in a way to ease their afflictions. Indirectly help them by continuing to strive to abandon your own afflictions and becoming a Buddha for their sake. This is how Bodhisattvas live their life. This is how they move through their communities and move through society. Guided by wisdom, which understands this display of the afflictions, the expression of the afflictions from others, and compassion, driving the Bodhisattva forward to respond with tenderness and care, and their wisdom helping them respond with skill. We try and emulate them by responding in these ways to helping others to the best of our capacity. And just before I read the 34th verse, the second summary verse, again I mentioned that the 33rd verse is actually ends, this quote is in imperative, it's an exclamation point. So Shantideva is emphasizing this is just due to some sort of cause. Now the second verse of summary. If they could act independently, since no one desires suffering, who amongst all sentient beings would ever experience suffering? If they could act independently. So that, look at this first word then, independently. So this word we've come across many times in this and other texts, but the Tibetan word here is different. So as a translator, I'd never seen it before. It has the same meaning as what we normally see translated as independent or free will or freedom, but here it's a different construction. And so the meaning is independently, but the word construction is for one's own wishes. So the meaning would be something like, if they could act independently for their own wishes, or if they could act independently to fulfill or achieve their own wishes. So that is the meaning of independently here. Again, it's just a different word structure. So if they could act independently to achieve their own wishes. So this is again what we've looked at previously in this section, with this being now a summary verse at the end of this subsection, that if beings could act independently out of their own wish, not under the power of any other conditions, then it continues, since no one desires suffering, because we know this, as part of the motivating impulse behind all that we think, say, or do, we want to be free of suffering. Looking at the whole verse, starting at the beginning, if they could act independently, so beings could act independently to fulfill their own wishes, since no one desires to suffer, we never would. Because, and it continues, who amongst all sentient beings would ever experience suffering? So we have this natural or innate belief in that things are independent. They're not dependent on causes, that beings act with free will. And if it was the case, if that were the case, no one would choose to suffer. Beings would always choose to be free of suffering. The reality is, and this we know, things do not are not always in accordance with our wishes. It's impossible for things to always happen in the way that we wish. But if we could be independent, if we had free will, we'd make sure things were always in accordance with our wishes. We would fulfill our yearning for happiness. We would never suffer. We'd experience no problems or difficulties. But this is not the case. This is not the case. The summary meaning of this 34th verse is that all that we yearn for, all that we want, every experience of happiness, it comes about independent on causes and conditions. Every problem, suffering or difficulty, everything that is unwanted, also comes about independent on causes and conditions. And this is the case for all of us, and for everything that we experience. For all of us, every one of our wishes, whether those wishes that are fulfilled or not, they come about in dependence on causes and conditions. Think about this well. When you think about this well, it will make no sense to be surprised at something or disappointed in something. Why be surprised or disappointed when things do not go in accordance with our wishes, or others do not act in a way that we would like them to, that we would prefer them to? Nothing surprising, nothing to be disappointed about. There's no reason to criticize ourselves or others, complain about ourselves or others. Merely what is being observed is an expression of causes and conditions. And in particular, it's an expression of the afflictions. And why is this the case? Well, we are ordinary beings. Therefore, we will act in ordinary ways. We are afflicted beings. We will act in afflicted ways. So not wanting to suffer and wanting to experience only happiness, those wishes on their own are not enough. We need to take to heart that happiness and suffering come about in dependence on causes and conditions. Therefore, by applying ourselves to the causes of happiness and applying ourselves to avoid the causes for suffering, what we yearn for will be achieved. So think well about this presentation we've been looking at, that everything comes about in dependence on causes and conditions. Beings do not act independently. They cannot independently fulfill their own wishes. This rather comes about dependently, dependent on causes and conditions. Patience is presented, and the perfection of patience is presented in 3 divisions. So we looked at the first one from verses 12 to 21, the patience of willingly accepting hardships. Now, with these 2 summary verses, we've just concluded the patience of conviction with respect to Dharma. And now we start the third and final division of patience, from verse 35 to 41, patience of disregarding harm from others. Patience, so from verse 35 to 41, patience of disregarding harm from others. And we just concluded the section, verses 22 to 34, in respect to Dharma. And then the first section, 12 to 21, willingly accepting hardship. So the 35th verse. Through lacking conscientiousness, people intentionally harm themselves with thorns and other things, and also obsessed with it, attaining women and so forth, do things like starve themselves. This first verse, this section on cultivating the patience that pays no heed to those who cause harm, starts with, through lacking conscientiousness. This conscientiousness we looked at in the context of ethics in the 4th chapter. When one lacks conscientiousness, or I think maybe in English this works better if you say, when one doesn't have a conscience. This refers to, so when this is lacked, then the afflictions will arise. When one is conscientious, when one will be acting in accordance with one's ethical conscience, then one is not acting under the influence of afflictions, but rather restraining oneself within the confines of what is ethical. But when one lacks conscientiousness, one goes beyond those ethical restraints and is acting in an afflicted manner. The afflictions have arisen, they're abiding, and they are influencing us. And when we do so, we act in ways that harm us, harm ourselves. And this is then expressed here, people intentionally. So, with their afflictions dominant, people then act intentionally, harming themselves with thorns and other things referring to walking on hot coals and these kinds of behaviors, which clearly directly harm the body. So this person in these instances knows that by walking on these thorns, they're going to experience pain. Walking on hot coals, they're going to experience pain. But lacking conscientiousness, under the influence of the afflictions, this is what they do. So everyone wishes to abide in happiness, to never experience any problems or difficulties, yet, under the influence, controlled by the afflictions, they act in ways which directly cause them harm. So for example, under the influence of confused ignorance, they do something which they think will have a beneficial result in the end, such as walking on hot coals, walking on thorns. So they are actually intentionally harming themselves under the influence of the afflictions. So knowing that this is the case, perhaps we've seen this in ourselves, under the influence of the afflictions, we act in ways which harm us. But we certainly know this is the case in general too. We should take the lesson to heart, that therefore it is not at all surprising when beings under the influence of their afflictions act in the way to harm others. Because if we all value ourselves and our own happiness greatly, but if under the influence of the afflictions we harm ourselves, no surprise we're going to harm others. And likewise, a being before us who values their own happiness, values themselves, their life greatly, if they will harm themselves under the influence of the afflictions, no surprise if they act in a way that brings harm to others. So this then is something to take to heart, because it explains or gives a further reason why not to take personally others' harmful behavior towards us or our loved ones, and to understand they are merely expressing the affliction's dominance within them. So explain where this illustration comes from. Harm themselves with thorns and other things, and I mentioned one example, such as walking on hot coals. So where this example comes from is that there are those who have a belief system, a philosophy that presents a means by which one gains liberation from suffering. And that means involves intentionally inflicting harm on the physical body, such as walking on thorns, or even sitting on thorns and making sure that one is not moving one's body in a way to alleviate the suffering, but ensure that the thorns are digging into oneself. So you're not trying to alleviate the suffering, but experience it. Or walking on hot coals, or another belief that some have, is by sitting within a ring of fire, meditating there and enduring the searing heat of the flames which surround you, that this also burns away the negativity and leads to liberation. So this is in accordance with their views, and they'll be able to present many reasons why this is a skillful technique to gain freedom from suffering. But the reality is, what they're calling an intelligence is really an ignorance, confused ignorance, confused about reality, confused in this case by causes and effects. Thinking of this, well, one response would be to laugh, to mock. A more skillful response would be to understand this is just another expression of the afflictions. And this is how beings act in varying ways throughout the day. Under the influence of the afflictions, they do things which they believe will lead to happiness, and if they can, even if they observe it is causing harm to themselves or to others, they justify it in accordance with their confused ignorance. And in this way, they take advantage of others, they cause pain to others, even take the life of others, and they justify it, they explain it. Understanding this process well, then, compassion will arise. for these suffering beings, harming themselves right now and creating causes for future suffering too. And furthermore, not being surprised when they act in ways that are harmful to others, when under the influence of their afflictions, they harm themselves as well. So the third and fourth line, just remove the word obsessed, and I'll change the fourth line. So something like wanting to attain women and so forth, do things like do dangerous things and starve themselves. Do dangerous things and like starving themselves. Do dangerous things and like starving themselves. That probably works. Do dangerous things like starving themselves. Wanting to attain women and so forth, do dangerous things like starving themselves. The meaning is, with this strong attachment, with a strong attachment, a burning desire, a thirst for something, or you could even say a hunger for something, people can do dangerous things. So the illustration is to, I don't know, we'd say get a girlfriend, get a boyfriend, something like that. Then people do things which are actually dangerous. Maybe to impress someone, to impress someone. So this then is the illustrations given of people intentionally harming themselves under the influence of afflictions. For the third and fourth line, it's meaning like doing dangerous things so as to gain what you desire. So in terms of getting a boyfriend or girlfriend, I don't know, like one may do something very dangerous to impress them, or in the past they did duels and this kind of thing. Here, the meaning is the same as we saw above. People under the influence of the afflictions, or rather than the influence, really under the power of, under the control of their afflictions, they intentionally do things which will harm themselves. They are doing it to fulfill their desire for perhaps a partner, and they do something which can harm themselves. So recognizing that, firstly, we should not be surprised when they act in a way that is harmful towards others, if they act in a way also that is harmful to themselves. Moreover, we should have compassion for them, knowing that they are acting under the influence of the afflictions, knowing that they have no freedom. So the meaning of this verse then is, when others act towards us in a way that is unskillful, unkind, perhaps they criticize us, blame us, or they talk behind our back, complain about us, we need to have trained ourselves well to remember all this is an expression of their afflictions. And their afflictions merely arisen in dependence on causes. There is no free will here. Rather, this person is just expressing what they are habituated to. And myself, as a student of the Dharma, I'm going to respond not in an afflicted way, which would be perhaps to criticize them back, or to talk behind their back to others. And it's no different from them. I'm rather going to respond under the influence of wisdom, not under the influence of ignorance or another affliction, but under the influence of wisdom. And the wisdom is, in this instance, the understanding that this person is under the control of their afflictions. They are worthy of my compassion. And therefore, one rather responds in an unafflicted manner, under the influence of one's own intelligence or wisdom, rather than under the influence of afflictions. So I think in society, you know perhaps better than me, the things that people do to impress a man or woman, that they put a lot of effort into things which can be harmful towards themselves. Now, building on this, the same way of thinking, the 36th verse. Denied some jump from heights, take poison or eat incompatible food, and through non-meritorious behavior they harm themselves. So when one's wishes are unfulfilled, one's response is all too often destructive. So the illustration is given here, particularly in terms of when one's romantic wishes are dashed, when someone does not show interest in return. This can be devastating. One's heart may well be broken, and therefore one may even take one's own life, jumping from a great height, taking poison. So this, we know, happens. We understand here, again, as with the previous verse, it cannot be surprising that others act in harmful or unkind ways towards us and towards others if they are entirely capable of harming themselves, not just causing pain like in the previous verse, but even taking their own life. So again, take this to heart to recognize that if people can intentionally harm themselves like this, it's not at all surprising they act in ways that are harmful to others. And this is the meaning then of the third and fourth line. And through non-meritorious behavior they harm themselves. So this then is much broader. Non-meritorious behavior, or non-virtuous behavior, refers to being under the influence of the afflictions, because it is the afflictions that makes the mind non-virtuous, and therefore any speech or behavior non-virtuous. And they harm themselves, and they harm others. So despite wanting happiness, being under the influence of the afflictions, beings cause themselves harm. And sometimes, as we saw in the immediately previous verse, they do so intentionally, confused. They think this will lead to happiness. Could be taking their own life, could be harming themselves through starving themselves, through an eating disorder, something else. And so here the message to take is to see the harm the afflictions do, and how beings harm themselves intentionally and unintentionally. They harm themselves now, they harm themselves later in this life and in lives to come. Recognizing that when beings are under the influence of the afflictions, whether those afflictions are being expressed towards themselves, towards others, towards yourself, the only appropriate response is one of compassion. Never one of condescension. Never one of finger wagging, or anger, or any form of unkindness. These are beings desperate for happiness, but overwhelmed under the control of their afflictions, harming themselves. The response then is the same twofold response as mentioned earlier. In relation to the person, only tenderness and care, under the influence of patience and compassion. This is the direct response to ease the suffering of others. Then secondly, the indirect response. Take this illustration, this manifestation of the afflictions and the harm they cause as motivation to strive to rid yourself of the afflictions and strengthen your virtuous qualities to become a Buddha for the sake of others. Use this as motivation to apply yourself diligently to abandon the afflictions and to cultivate all excellent qualities so that one really can be of great benefit to all others. Strengthen that determination. For the sake of this suffering being and all like them, I will become a Buddha. I encourage you to take this teaching to heart, recognizing that its independence on reflecting on the reasons presented here again and again, so that you become habituated, they become part of you, that your way of thinking will change, that you will grow spiritually, you'll develop spiritually, you'll become the person you long to be. have the strength of mind, one needs to recognize our sole affliction, our sole enemy is the afflictions. That is, our afflictions, and it's afflictions of each, and it's an enemy, it is our enemy, and it is the enemy of each and every being. Therefore, it is never appropriate to have a negative view towards someone, criticize them or complain about what they said or what they do or what they're not doing. Recognizing they have no freedom, they are under the control of their afflictions. It is merely their afflictions that have taken control and are being expressed. And that no one is harmed more by the afflictions than the afflicted person, now and in lives to come. This needs to be recognized, because all too often this isn't how we relate to the afflicted. And that is a sign of our need to reflect on this ever more, to see that they have no freedom. So therefore, and furthermore, we need to take to heart that in order to help, in order to be part of the group of great beings who are helping others, I need to strive to act in accordance with their example, their teachings, and strive to abandon my own afflictions so that I can help more. So in terms of these two ways of responding to challenging circumstances, the first was towards the individual, directly. The only appropriate response is in accordance with our wisdom, our intelligence, brought about or developed in dependence on these teachings, and thereby respond with compassion, kindness, and care. And then, secondly, the indirect response, to take this as motivation to develop myself further. I've seen before me today, through this person's unskillful behavior, another display of the afflictions and the harm they cause. I have to rid my own mind of them so I never do this to others, and that by becoming ever more purified, I can respond with skill in accordance with the needs of those experiencing the most pain, especially those experiencing the most pain, the most afflicted, and thereby live in accordance with this aspiration we all have, which is to hold others close, to hold them dear. Again, especially those who are most afflicted, those who are in most pain. And you take what you observe in your own lived experience to strengthen your resolve, your determination. I have to abandon my afflictions so that I can help such people, so that I can be an example of what is possible, so that I can ease the suffering of others. So I encourage you to reflect in this way and thereby transform your heart.
Then
Then thank you. Thank you. We can conclude there tonight. Thank you.